talking about a topic that is quite important in a sense that we often hear that we are what we eat. And we often hear that gut could be classified as a second brain because the connection between your mind, your brain, and your stomach is an important one as it influences your behavior, your mood, and everything else. To dive into this topic, we have Bushra with us today, and she is a psychotherapist, a mental health commissioner. She also has a master's in neuropsychology. Bushra, welcome to Aagahi.
Thank you so much, and walaikum assalam. Thank you for having me and for that lovely introduction.
So, very interesting topic today, the gut and brain connection. So, tell us about that.
Well, I was really interested in this topic first, often we would have World Mental Health Day coming up and, World Mental Health Month, etc. And, and I think there was still this, confusion that what is mental health, etc. And, and I think we've always talked about mental health and physical health as two completely separate, discrete entities.
Yeah.
And people would still say, well, why are we still talking about mental health, and talking about mental health makes it worse, etc. And you should just try to be happy. And we still have those preconceptions without a clear understanding of how it works.
Yeah.
But actually, we can't really talk about physical health and mental health as two different concepts.
Yeah.
It's really not as if we have a brain and then somewhere else we have a body, that our body is experiencing something and our mind is somewhere else, and there's no communication. And we know that's not true, but they are very linked. So, and so I think my interest came from just thinking about how the two are, linked, and what can we do about it for our better mental health and for our physical health. And also one of the keys is obviously when you're able to know about something and recognize something, then only are you able to then heal and aid recovery.
True.
So whether it's a sprained ankle or a leaky gut or something, as you mentioned, we should be treating them both the same way.
Fair enough. And you mentioned a very important point that your mental health is not separate from your physical health. They are interlinked. And as they say, that a healthy mind is a healthy body, and vice versa. So why is it important to talk about mental health, Bushra?
Well, mental health is everything, is who we are, and I think the very definition of mental health is, the sign of mental health is the ability to be the person you want to be, to have the relationships that you want to have, to feel healthy in your body, to feel healthy in your mind, to be able to deal with life stresses and life and everyday experiences, and get through them, and to have the relationships and to have the productivity and whatever else that you want to do. So we really need to start thinking about what is it that I can do to feel my very best and to do my very best.
Yes.
Right. And back to the question that you mentioned about the connection and why is it important to talk about it. And I did feel that, I remember when I was younger and I was studying science, and we would always learn about the mind as a supercomputer, this magical miracle of complex neurons, which it definitely is. But what actually happened somewhere in the last few hundred years is that we began to understand the mind as a computer, as and a very scientific computer, and basically, while this had benefits that we had a lot of advances in surgery and trauma care and pharmaceuticals, etc., there was a false dichotomy between the brain and the body, where we started to treat the brain as this computer that we just had to understand how the parts are interlinked and how we can do it. But it was a machine with replaceable independent parts, but there was no connection whatsoever to anything else.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but when we look at it like a computer, we kind of ignore the influence that our body has on our brain and how the impact it has on our gut and the chemicals, etc. But strangely enough, we have it in our language. And you mentioned something about the gut as a second brain. And, if you think about the language that we use, for example, we say we have butterflies in our stomach.
Yes.
We say we have cold feet about something, or we have shivers down our spine when we watch a scary scene, or we say this is a gut-wrenching experience or a punch to the gut, etc. If we're excited about something, we know that our heart starts pounding, or if we have anxiety about a job interview, our muscles clamp up and they tense up. We know that, when we have, there's so much science about body language as well, which is unconscious, that, when, you can tell by a person when they're slumped or open body and closed body, the hand orientation, feet orientation, where they face, etc. There's so much out there.
Yes.
So we have this information, but, we're still kind of trying to understand how it actually works.
So, talking about how it works, what about the neurotransmitters within the brain? How does
Mhm.
that influence your behavior, your mood? And like some fantastic examples that you gave, that when you're feeling anxious, you feel like throwing up, or you feel your heartbeat is racing when you're excited, all of these things.
Mm, absolutely. So that's the very crux of neuroscience that you're mentioning. So we know that how the brain works. That the brain has a very complex system of neurotransmitters, which are basically chemical messengers that are sent to different parts of the brain, and they are responsible for sending messages. Whether we want to move our finger, whether we're recalling a memory, whether we're doing an executive task. So our brain sends out a number of different chemical neurotransmitters. However, these neurotransmitters also have a physical effect on our blood pressure, our heart rate, our sleep, and our appetite.
Yeah.
And our actions, they activate a complicated system of nerves that connects the brain to the body.
Yes.
And we have this one nerve in our body, which is which scientists are now recognizing as one of the most important nerves, which is the vagus nerve. And vagus comes from the word wandering, which means that it just basically is connected to is connected from the front of our brains, the surface of our brains, to literally every organ in our body. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But going back to neurotransmitters, what neurotransmitters do is that they take orders to and from the brain to the nervous system. If I want to move my hand, for example,
Yeah.
the motor neurons will be sending transmitters.
Mm.
And these fall into different categories. For example, there's excitate, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but we know we have excitatory and inhibitory. So we have dopamine and glutamate and GABA and serotonin, and they all have different functions. So we know that dopamine is the pleasure, the reward chemical, and when we accomplish something, and that feeling of happiness that we get, that's from the dopamine that runs through our body. And serotonin is called the happy chemical. We know that we have chemicals that help us sleep, etc., which is when we have coffee, for example, coffee inhibits those neurotransmitters. And they, while they are responsible for the functions, the memory and the movement and learning and everything, they also impact our emotional state. So, for example, as I mentioned, motivation, happiness, sadness, our mental states of concentration, learning, decision making, our physical attributes, our sleep, eating behavior, our appetite, our gastrointestinal functioning, pain perception. And however, what can happen is that if there is an imbalance of these through different reasons. So for example, it might be behavior, it might be medication, it might be nutrition, it might be your sleep. Some of these imbalances are then impact our emotional, mental, and physical states then. And a really good example I was reading recently was of Black Friday sales. That if you imagine that a normal store has a capacity of 500 people, let's say, and it needs 400 people to be able to stay open. It's got 8 doors that allows people to come in and out in a normal state, etc. But in Black Friday, you have maybe 1,500 people rushing through the doors, right? And they've had to employ extra staff. The store is destroyed. There's things lying everywhere. The staff is exhausted, and then it takes time for the shop to restock, to refresh their staff. How they get in extra staff members, etc. All the doors are closed. They have security guards to manage. So what can happen is, a lot of times, through pressures of the modern world, through different lifestyle factors, a lot of us, we live our life like a Black Friday sale. Right? We are so busy all the time. We are parents, we work, we're studying, we have everyday stress, whether it's we have relationship stress, we're juggling 100 different things at once. We are working, we have our own anxieties, we have our own trauma that we might have gone through, we might have fights during our day, etc. And and what happens then is with the autonomous nervous system, which is responsible for our body functioning, it has 2 systems. So the sympathetic and then parasympathetic. And the sympathetic is the one that's our fight and flight. So when we are scared or upset or angry or nervous, how, as I mentioned, your your body gets ready to fight or flight. So it's your heart rate increases, your neurotransmitters increase, your glucose gets stimulated, and in a very physical state, your heart rate increases, your breathing becomes shallow, your
Yes.
pupils become dilated, etc. You might have to have a go to the bathroom, etc. And this all happens because our body is gearing up for that stress,
Yeah.
right?
And sometimes
But
I think when people are having a panic attack, it directly influences their breathing, and they find it really difficult to take a proper deep breath. And they're told to kind of
absolutely.
just focus on their breathing so they can relax.
Absolutely. And when that happens, and because we kind of, what then happens that we have a parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest, system, which is the off switch in a way, the parachute system. And that is the system that tells the body to calm down,
Yes.
slow down, breathe. As you mentioned, we don't have time to take a deep breath. And so what we need to then do is we need to then activate that and say and recognize that, okay, I'm under stress, this is happening to me. I've had all these experiences. I need to take that deep breath, take a step back, and then when you activate that system, your pupils go back to normal size, your heart rate slows down, your airways open up so you can breathe better, etc. But but that takes an effort.
Yes.
Because as humans, what we do is that we spend a lot of time in our drive-in threat system because we're constantly running around,
Yes.
right? And we have very little time in our soothe system, right? So after a hard day, you know how we say we just want to relax and just veg out. So
Yeah.
that's your brain sending out a message and saying, I want to send out all these chemicals and all these neurotransmitters to relax. But if we don't give our brain that message, and if we don't give our body that time to do it, our body doesn't get the clear signal. It doesn't get that signal to say, okay, you can calm down now. And so it kind of then it remains on that very hyperactive vigilant system. And those neurotransmitters, that Black Friday sale, remains in our system, right? And so we kind of remain in that state of agitation. And then we're constantly faced with those stream of neurotransmitters, and everything is going on. Your heart rate is shallow, and your body just learns to live in that state constantly.
Yeah.
So it's really important to be able to recognize that stress and to say, oh, I've had a bit of a stressful situation, or I've had this argument with somebody, or I've just been juggling too much of time. Let me take a step back,
Yeah.
And reset my system.
Right. You mentioned serotonin and dopamine, some of the chemicals in the brain, and how they influence and impact your mood. What if there is an imbalance in the secretions and the amount that is released in the brain? And how does that cause, for example, depression or any other disorder?
Right. I mean, there's a lot of different complex systems at play here, and at the moment there's still a lot of we're still trying to understand the exact impact of different things. But what we do know is that, for example, when we have that constant the constant activation of those neurotransmitters and the imbalance that's happening in your body, where we have the too many excitatory and too little inhibitory neurotransmitters being secreted, what happens is that we do have a part of the brain which is called the amygdala, which helps us process fear and emotions. And when we have a too much secretion of the excitatory neurotransmitters, science has found that actually the size of the amygdala actually enlarges, and then this can cause then moodiness, and it can cause a stronger stress response. So sometimes you might have a very small trigger and you have a very large response. It's because there's that imbalance in your brain, whereas your body has not been able to come to that resting stop to be able to kind of have the homeostasis in your nervous system. So, and also this long-term secretion of these neurotransmitters, they also reduce the connection between your amygdala and other areas of your brain. So you have lesser ability to regulate your emotions. Right. And that's when you can cause different mood disorders can be caused, where the inability to regulate what you're going through, to deal with different stresses of life, to kind of being able to to cope with relationship issues and conversation and and just everyday everyday anxieties, that connection between different brain parts is lessened. Right. And then we also have the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for cognitive functioning. And And neurotransmitter disbalance can also cause that to thin. Right? It can also cause, for example, the basal ganglia, which is our motor neurons. It can also cause them to become smaller in size. So that kind of stops our movement and inhibits our movement. And and I'll talk about the vagus nerve in a bit in terms of depression, etc. But when we know that people with depression might have a lowered facial tone, more blank faces, and all of this is linked because of the different connections between what's happening with our between our different brain systems. And so being less able to control the negative reactions to stimuli, being able to be more easily startled, is all a result of this kind of burnout. And it just makes our brain a lot more sensitive to stressful situations. So whatever that stressful situation is. And it also remember that we know that whatever experience we go through, it's not just our brains that are going through that experience. Our entire bodies are there during that experience. And what happens is that that experience gets imprinted into every single cell in your body. Every single cell experiences this event and it forms a blueprint. So when you go through life and you're faced with similar situations, then your body will then react according to what it remembers. So it's really important that when we do have so it's really that, when you ask why is it important to talk about mental health, because what our experiences then define how we respond for the rest of our life and how our brains and how our bodies have experienced that situation.
So
Right. So yeah.
on the superficial level, you may feel that you have healed or moved on from a specific event, incident, or accident. But like you said, it impacts your entire body, each and every cell of your existence, right? So, and in life, sometimes certain things may happen that may even trigger a certain kind of response or emotion. And it goes back to when you actually experienced it for the first time. So,
Absolutely.
and I know you're going to speak about the vagus nerve later on, but this connection between memory that is imprinted in your like somatic system, how can you work on that in terms of healing?
That's a very big question, right? And I think in a short, you can do some short term and long term. So I think short term is really important to be aware of your experiences and to be able to have that time and that space and self-awareness to process it. So, as you mentioned earlier, things like just first taking a deep breath and saying, okay, I've had this experience, what's happened with this experience, talking about it, or journaling is really good, because when we journal or when we talk to somebody, we're able to then make head or tail of that situation. So, with therapy, a really good example I always see is of this ball of knotted wool, and you have this therapist who's gently pulling it apart just to kind of unravel the threads of that, so just to understand, okay, this is what I went through, this is what happened, this is an experience, let me understand what my reaction was, let me understand what happened, and and then heal through that. And so things around, I think therapy is very underrated.
Yeah.
And definitely going to a professional, speaking to somebody, having that ability to process your experience and to then heal from it, and then you obviously have prayer as well, and then you have physical, and you have physical ways of dealing with it, which is through your nutrition, your deep breathing, your exercises, etc. And there's a lot of different therapies that you can go through. There's things like CBT and and NLP and etc. And I'm not going to go too much into that, but I think it's really important to at the very surface to recognize a negative experience you have. And like I think sometimes and sometimes you might see somebody and you might just be irritated with them for no reason. Yeah. And it's only when you dig deeper you realize that actually they remind you of somebody who had hurt you in the past.
So this is not a conscious memory then?
It's not. It's not. It's something called transference, and I always find really important. It's really interesting that like in a small example, that you might see somebody wearing a hat, and you just don't like that person, and then later on you realize it's because the person who hurt you in the past, might have had a negative relationship with, was wearing a similar hat. Yeah. It could be something similar to that.
But is this not the association that your brain automatically does by default? Or is it because the feelings or the unpleasant emotions, they're trapped in your system and they just won't release? Which one?
It's both,
Wow.
and it's both of them, because your brain unconsciously remembers it, because we do have memories and our brain does remember a lot. But also, if you haven't dealt with that experience, it will come back, right? And we have to remember our brains are geared to protect us.
Mm,
We have, our brains are geared to survive, for survival, and our brains, their primary function is to say, I need to keep this person alive,
right.
right? And sometimes they will actually suppress a memory if they feel that that memory is going to be harmful to you,
Mm,
right? And we know this from trauma survivors and things like that. They might have completely blanked out things,
yeah.
right? And that's because our body is trying, but then the cells in our body remember.
Mm,
And so, it's important to kind of think about, I think in a summary, to kind of really, be have therapy or have a conversation with somebody and say, I don't know why I'm reacting this way, or this is what happened, etc. Let's try to explore what this response is, and
mm,
and to work through that, rather than and I think a lot of times we go through life just responding, you
yes.
know and we have a stimulus, we just respond. But there's always a space between a stimulus and a response where we can actually make a decision about how we want to respond, and we just need to find that space and to see what is going on with you there, and to then support your development there so that you respond the way you actually want to respond.
And also whether it is necessary, absolutely necessary to respond. Uh,
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't have to. You mentioned a really important thing, Bushra, self-awareness, being conscious of yourself and things that are happening within your body and your mind. You gave brilliant examples as well. But where does the gut come in? What is the
Right.
role of the gut in all of this?
Okay, fantastic. The gut, as you mentioned, we say we have a gut feeling about something. We
Uh-huh.
always say trust your gut. We say, the gut is the second brain, etc. We have butterflies in the stomach. Now, as I mentioned, we have this vein in our body, the vagus nerve, as I mentioned, which is connected to the most major organs in the body, and it runs from the brain through the face, through the thorax, all the way to the abdomen. And it's a direct communication from the gut system to the surface of the brain. So whenever and when there is sustained stress or trauma, for example, that becomes hyperactive. And we tend to think of stress as emotional, but the main impact of stress is on organs of the body,
Mm,
right? So when we experience stress or anxiety,
mm,
it triggers our vagus nerve, which slows the heart, it lowers our blood pressure, it gives us this kind of tunnel vision, nausea, ringing in the ears, irregular heartbeat.
mm,
And when the vagus nerve, if there's a disbalance in the vagus nerve, it's called a vagal tone. If it's not in a state of homeostasis and it's not able to communicate effectively to the rest of our body, then it creates a disbalance. So then we have problems with gut problems such as IBS, gastritis, etc. Your digestion, your heart rate, etc.
mm,
So the vagus activation then depends on a lot of different things. It depends on our hormones, such as our cortisol, which is, it's activated when we're stressed out. It also depends on our digestive hormones, what we're eating, inflammation in our gut. It's, and
sugar level.
exactly. And 80% of the vagus nerve fibers actually communicate from the body to the brain.
Wow.
So whatever is happening in our body is then communicated to our brain, and 20% of the fibers are communicating from our brain to our body. So how this actually works is, we talked about neurotransmitters before. So we know that neurons are cells that are found in our brain, and they are central nervous system, and they're responsible for telling our bodies how to behave.
Mm,
We have about 100 billion neurons in our brain. We also have around 500 million neurons in our gut
wow.
alone,
And I think
right?
recently they have discovered we also have them in our heart.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and so a lot of, and in fact, we talked about serotonin, which is the happiness, hormone, etc. And it also helps control our body clock, our sleep, etc. A large proportion of the serotonin in our body is actually created in our gut, right? Not in our brain, it's created in our gut. So the microbes that live in our gut, they are responsible for producing a lot of the neurotransmitters that are then transferred to the brain and that affect our feelings. So, for example, we know that gut microbes that metabolize bile acids and amino acids that help us digest our food. They are also responsible for stress and social disorders, right? We know that, for example, when we have, when we have unhealthy gut bacteria, that can cause inflammation in our gut. That can then also cause inflammation in our brain. So sometimes, we say we have brain fog, or after having a particular heavy meal, or something that we just, oh, I can't really think straight. My brain is so cloudy. That might be because there's something happening in your gut, right? And also, if your stress system, response system, and your sympathetic nervous system is switched on for too long, it can lead to inflammation, right? And that inflammation can happen in your gut, but inflammation is then associated with a number of brain disorders like depression and Alzheimer's disease. Right? There are certain bacteria. So we found, they found that there was a study in America a couple of years ago where they found that a certain, inhabitants of a certain town, they were all coming up with, there was like a large scale depression suddenly happening. And, through a lot of series of, of tests and research, etc., they found that there was a leaky sewage pipe which had been going to the food chain.
Wow.
So that bacteria that had been passing into the food chain was then impacting the gut, depression. And they're like, okay, we're not really sure about this. How can it be? So they took mice and the mice who had the dirty water, and they isolated that bacteria from their stool, and they placed it into a human stool, right? And then they found that those they placed it into other mice, and they found that other mice who previously had been happy, in which we know because they were like able to, for example, do a maze in 10 seconds. Now those mice were doing that same maze in 30 or 40 seconds because they had anhedonia, which is lack of motivation. Right? So whatever we eat.
This reminds me of another example. This like decades ago, I read that, during the Salem witchcraft trials that occurred in various parts of the world, there was a specific kind of rye, and ladies were like using that to make bread. And in that whole town, all the women, they were showing these symptoms where people started to associate it with witchcraft. Although it was all because of the rye bread that they were consuming. I think it was fermented or something, and it affected their gut and ultimately affecting their abnormal behavior. So that's a brilliant example that you have given, Bushra, that what we consume has a direct impact.
Definitely. So I mean, it's also, what we want to think about is our gut bacteria. So we know that our gut bacteria affects our brain health through the millions of neurotransmitters via the vagus nerve. So for example, when we look at things like probiotics and prebiotics, etc., right? And those are live bacteria which our bodies need to kind of help with our inflammation, with our we call it with our digestion, with the way the body digests the nutrition from our food, etc. And so we know that probiotics, then they're also known as the word psychobiotics. And those are shown to improve symptoms of stress, anxiety, and depression, etc. And also prebiotic, which are fibers that are fermented by our gut bacteria. And also, we found that, for example, taking different prebiotics has reduced amounts of stress hormones in our body, which is cortisol. Right. We also know that, for example, specific foods such as omega-3 fats, which are found in the human brain. So they also increase good bacteria. They're also, and we know that they're good for the brain, but they reduce the risk of brain disorders. Fermented foods such as yogurts, cheese, etc., they all contain prebiotics. So they also then reduce the stress hormone, cortisol, etc. We have tea, coffee, olive oil, etc., which are, there's also some foods that we can have, for example, that are present in eggs and cheese. And they can then, they actually convert directly into the neurotransmitter serotonin. So they actually make us feel better.
So the deficiency would do the complete opposite.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So when you're not getting the right amount of nutrition in your food, or the right amount of fibers, that means if you're not getting the right amount of omega-3s or probiotics, it means your food's not being digested properly, which can then lead to inflammation, etc.
It's just like people, with sleep disorders or insomnia, often when you have the blood test results, you find out they are deficient in vitamin D, magnesium, or certain omegas. And then they are given those as a supplement to promote good sleep.
Absolutely. And magnesium is really important for promoting sleep as well. And magnesium and vitamin D are linked to so much. And, we say for mental health, you go outside, get as much vitamin D as you possibly can.
Not in this country, no.
Well, not in this country, which is why we're all relying on supplements, right? But, and also interesting, when we have when we have the healthy gut and the messages are being sent through the vagus nerve, right? The vagus nerve has something that we call the vagal tone, which is the ratio between your two nervous systems, your sympathetic and your parasympathetic. And so if there's a disbalance in the gut, then this can also impact the vagal tone as well. And so you kind of don't have that homeostasis then, because you're either too high on the sympathetic or too high on the parasympathetic, which you don't want, right? So for example, we kind of think of the vagus nerve as a ladder, where at the very bottom of the ladder you have the dorsal, which is when you're just shut down, where your gut system isn't working, your vagal tone is not activated at all. And what then happens is, when we talk about, as I mentioned before, people with depression, or when they feel disconnected or numb, and when we're talking to somebody and their faces are very blank and they're not able to respond or make eye contact, and we just and people sometimes say, oh, I feel very disconnected, I feel very numb, I can't process emotions.
Yes.
That can be a sign of your vagus nerve not being activated at all, right? Because of a disbalance for whatever reason. And on the other hand, you can also have the sympathetic nervous system, which is overly activated. So you're constantly stressed, you're constantly snappy, as we say. We're constantly agitated, little things set us off, etc. We're just irritable, etc. But what we want to have it on a ventral, which is this feeling safe, feeling secure, feeling connected to people all around you, right? And a very important part of this is to kind of, blood sugar imbalances, for example, can impact your vagal tone. So it can put you into that height. After you have sugar, you feel, I feel very jumpy, I feel very agitated, etc. Or when you have gut disorders, etc. This can all impact. And so until our vagus nerve is on a balance between the two nervous systems, right? It impacts our mind, it impacts our mood, it impacts our digestion, our bowel movements, our blood pressure, our pulse rate, even our weight. So healthy blood sugar, things like being able to speak properly, our ability to swallow, they're all really badly impacted.
So this is why they say if you understand your second brain, which is your gut, some researchers indicate that they could even treat things like IBS, for example. So you gave a few examples of things that if we consume, it can really promote that healthy connection between the brain and the gut. But what about the things that should not be consumed that would actually impact negatively the entire mechanism?
Yeah, I mean, to activate, what you want to look at is activating the vagus nerve. And there are a number of things you can do, both behavior and through nutrition. So in terms of behavior, deep breathing is a really big one, is to really, we have things like box breathing, and you have a lot of, breathing apps, which I find really useful sometimes. And, most of us, we breathe, we don't notice, when we're breathing, we just breathe. And that breath can often be very shallow, right? But really deep breathing, filling your lungs in until, and then out. So counting to 5 sometimes, or doing it in kind of like the flower opening or closing, etc., to really feel every breath coming in and out of your body, feeling the oxygen, going in, out, etc. is really important. That actually helps to activate your vagal tone. You can also, for example, do yoga. Cold showers are actually really interesting, like cold exposure. So swimming in cold water, having a cold shower, having a really cold glass of water, gargling, that can really help. So, as I mentioned, the vagus nerve goes through your thorax to your abdomen. So cold water can help in activating it.
Is it behind your neck? I mean, behind your throat, or is it like in the front?
That's a very good question. Ooh.
I think it runs from the back of your lower neck and it goes all the way down, isn't it? Because some people, when they are exposed to really stressful situations, when they feel threatened, or when they've had a really long day, a stressful situation, and they feel that, oh, we've got knots here on our shoulder and behind our back. And that's the exact location of that nerve. So the area surrounding it, the muscles surrounding that area, actually, they get really tense, and you can actually feel it. So you give an example of mindful breathing. It really does help, and massages as well really helps in kind of experiencing a moment of relaxation and calm.
Absolutely. So like things like mindfulness, being aware of your entire body state, being aware of your, and I think if you've done mindfulness exercises or meditation, the things around, feeling your fingers, your toes, being aware of how your body is feeling in the moment. Exercise, so that could be through thoughtful meditation exercise, but it could also be, just, any HIIT exercise or cardio exercise. And we know that during exercise, you release endorphins.
Yeah.
And endorphins are, from the same as morphine. So when you're in hospital and you're in pain and you take a morphine painkiller, and that suppresses the pain. So when you exercise, you actually end up, releasing the same endorphins that are pain relievers. Even something like chatting to a good friend, having a hug, feeling that releases oxytocin. And oxytocin is the hormone that is given to mothers during childbirth to reduce the pain, and it's called the love hormone. And when you're in love and when you're happy, your body releases oxytocin. So when you hug somebody, when you're in the company of some nourishing company, friendship, you're having a hug, you're just very relaxing. Your body is just feeling safe. That releases oxytocin as well.
Like when you're with your pet, for example, even that releases oxytocin in your brain.
I have a cat, and I have to say, having a cat has made me realize I'm not a pet person.
Cool.
So I'm got a dog next door, I've got a cat, so no comment there.
I wish I had one. I really, really want one too. Everybody who's listening, just a hint.
Or you can take my cat.
Please, after this show, let's talk about that. Yeah.
Definitely. So, and in terms of the question that you asked around food, we want to look at foods, at what kind of foods will reduce inflammation in our gut. When we have inflammation, and what inflammation actually does is that it inhibits our bodies from receiving that nutrition. So even if we might be having the right food, we're not getting the magnesium, we're not getting the omega-3s, we're not getting the vitamin D, we're not getting the iron. And all of that will then impact our physical health, and will also impact our mental health. And and obviously, as when our physical health isn't great, our mental health isn't great as well. If you have, even if you have just a broken or just a sore thumb, or sorry, a sore throat, or like even just pain in your finger, if you've hurt yourself during sports, you just feel down, right? You feel upset, etc. And so if you're not getting the nutrition, you're in pain, etc. You're feeling weak, you're feeling sluggish. That can all impact. So you want to look for anti-inflammatory foods. So that includes, for example, good quality pasture-fed meat, poultry, fish, etc., and really good quality. You want to have a lot of limes, lemons. You want to have avocados, which are full of really, really good fat, which is really good for your brain. Cruciferous vegetables. Ginger is really good for your body. Ginger is the top anti-inflammatory food. So just put some ginger in some water.
Trending these days, ginger shots, ginger and turmeric shots. They're really
absolutely. Yeah. They're all making a comeback, isn't it? What's it called? Turmeric lattes and things.
Yeah.
So like putting ginger in some hot water, steeping it, drinking it. Bone broth, which is very good for collagen, etc. Fish, turmeric, as you mentioned. Fermented food and vegetables are very good for gut bacteria, like kefir, sauerkraut, etc. Herbs, etc. And then you want to avoid the foods that are pro-inflammatory. So, for example, these are a lot of refined grains, a lot of grained products, gluten, etc. I mean, everything's okay in small quantities, but the amount they have a lot of sugar in them, for example, or very highly refined white breads, white grains, which have been bleached, take all the nutrients out, deep fried foods, very, very inflammatory, processed foods, processed meats, for example, sausages and burgers, and with a lot of additives, grain-fed meat and eggs.
Sorry, I'm smiling because I just had a burger just before this show, but it's okay. I mean, it's okay, right?
It tends to happen that, when you're upset, you're stressed out, you're irritable, you want to reach for that food. You want to have a burger and chips. You want to have a milkshake and a glass of, a fizzy drink, etc. And yes, sometimes it's nice, but actually in the time of stress, that's one of the worst things you can do, because your body at that moment, your body wants to, it wants to go into the parasympathetic nervous system. It wants to activate it. It wants to relax. And when you're having all of these, inflammatory foods, for example, deep fried foods, or even commercial trans fats, margarines, dressings, etc., what's actually happening is that you're promoting inflammation in your body even more. right? And then, as I said, your body then remembers your responses. So as you go through life, then your body will then remember how it reacted to the situation in the past. So what you really want to do is that when you're in a time of stress, you want to get your body, you want your brain to send the signals to your body to say, that's it. Everybody, system shut down. We are taking a break. We need to recuperate. We need to rest. We need to rebuild ourselves. When people say, I need to take a rest day or something, I need to re-nourish ourselves. We need to be giving our body those signals that, okay, this is how we reset. And also, one thing that actually might sometimes also happens is that, as I said, our brain uses our old experiences, but if those old experiences are faulty or outdated, right, what then happens is that you then create faulty interpretations of present experiences, right? So you might, and I did mention this before. So you kind of, because in the past you had a negative experience, you had like a faulty interpretation of it, or you didn't manage to kind of soothe yourself or to get out of that mode. Now, when you have that experience, your body is still using that outdated experience. So it's still responding the same way, even though you might not be doing the same thing, right? So you might not be, for example, having something unhealthy, but your body will respond like that, right? So your body is always on the lookout, and I was reading an example somewhere that, we have, we have a smoke detector in our brain and a watchtower in our brain, right? So danger, which is a normal part of life, your brain detects danger and it organizes into response. So it recognizes dangers through the five senses: our eyes, ears, nose, skin, etc. And we have the amygdala, as I mentioned, which is in the front, towards the front, the unconscious brain, the amygdala. Then you have the conscious frontal lobes, right? So the amygdala is kind of like the smoke detector. It detects that fear and anxiety, etc. And the frontal lobe is the watchtower of our brain, and it offers a broader perspective from high. It observes, makes judgments. It doesn't jump to conclusions, right? So what you want to do in your body is that you want to make sure that you're able to process that information, comes to the smoke detector, but then it passes to the front, to the watchtower for you to make an organized response. But if you have a stress response and you're suddenly activated and you don't manage to make those responses to pass the information to your frontal lobe, your brain remains in that very smoke detector, danger, respond, protect, jump back, shout, etc. And that is actually very harmful in the long run.
So this is what we refer to as the fight and flight mode.
Yeah. So you want to kind of then make sure that whatever information comes through, and you asked, for example, and you asked me previously that how can we, what can we do? And it's very important that when we are in a stressful situation or when we are in a difficult situation, we are able to recognize that, but we're also then able to take a stress back and formulate a response and say, what can I do now? Okay, I have a job interview, right? Or this relationship is under threat. So, how can I relax my body? How can I calm my body down? How can I, curate a system in my body that allows my amygdala to calm down and to send the response to my frontal lobe so that I can then make a measured, thoughtful response as I want to, and tell my body and tell my brain that you are safe. You are not under threat. You are able to be yourself. You are held. And that's what I mentioned when I talked about the vagal tone, that when we have a good vagal tone, then our brain is kind of the feeling of feeling safe, that you are okay. So you're able to survive.
If we heal our gut, we can actually heal our brain.
Yeah.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah. And there's a lot of things, we can do. We can, as I mentioned, there's hugging, oxytocin, there's gratitude diary, journals that we can keep, journaling it. We know about neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is how our brains are constantly plastic. And we know that every time we repeat an action, our brain encodes that action until it becomes habit, right? And it forms new neurons based on our activity. So the more good things that we practice, the more our brain becomes used to it. So by practicing, gratitude, by practicing smiling, by practicing, talking to a good friend, or practicing accomplishing micro goals, etc., we can then build our brains to be able to, to be primed to release the hormones that we want them to release, and teach brains that, that it's safe, and to release endorphins.
We spoke about things that we can consume and they can be beneficial to our body and our mind. We spoke about things that may be harmful to the mind and the body. But what about not consuming anything at all? And I'm referring to fasting, for example, intermittent fasting. And that's something which is highly recommended in our faith as well, for example, to fast on a Monday and a Thursday. But what are the benefits of fasting on the gut and how it impacts your mind?
I mean, fasting is scientifically proven to be actually really good for our mind, for our brains and our bodies, because we know that when we eat constantly, our bodies are constantly churning out chemicals and acids to digest that food, and our liver and our pancreas is constantly working. By fasting, we are giving our body a chance to rest and digest food, and so it gives our bodies a chance to digest the food and to be able to rest and to take a break as well, rather than just overloading it with food as well. So fasting is actually a really good thing you can do for your body. Obviously it depends on the person to person. It's always good that if you have mental health problems, or if you're having, for example, if you're having body, health problems, etc., then it's important to kind of talk to a really good nutritionist, a functional nutritionist, for example, to say what's the best protocol for myself, because it's not really one size fits all either.
Yeah.
Right. So, and you also want to make sure that you're getting the right hormones, nutrients. So if you are fasting, make sure that you open and you close your fast with the right foods. You make sure that in the foods, when you are eating, you're getting the right nutrition that you want. You're getting enough protein according to your body weight. You're not overloading with the empty carbohydrates and the sugar, because then you're going to end up damaging your system. You want to make sure that you're getting your omega oils, you're getting your magnesium, and then in the hours that you are fasting really gives your body a chance to rest.
You give some examples of how we can kind of stimulate our vagus nerve, and one of the things was like mindful breathing, maybe some forms of meditation, adhering to a healthy lifestyle that includes healthy diet, exercise. You mentioned it boosts our mood, and avoiding processed foods, refined sugars, and all of that.
Yeah.
Apart from that, what else can we do if, say, for example, it's not the things that we consume or things that we have consumed in the past that's affecting our behavior and mood, but if it's something that we have experienced, say, for example, in the past, and that has impacted or affected your gut, your digestive system in a negative way. And like you said, it's something which is trapped in your body. So how can you, because I know that healing is not going to be a one-day process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. In order to build new healthy habits, it's going to take time. But
Absolutely.
what are the small steps that our viewers, for example, can take to start on that healing journey?
Well, that's a very big question, a really important question, and a really great topic.
10 minutes, it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really great topic for for a whole other session. I think if it's something that's happening in your gut, then your gut can be healed through really good foods, medicines, and probiotics, prebiotics, etc. But in terms of experiences, one really important, one thing I really enjoyed learning about was NLP, neuro linguistic programming, and the whole idea is that the language that we use can really impact our emotions as well. So emotional expression, the way we speak, can also help keep our mind and our body on the same page. The things like self-compassion. So something might have happened in the past. You might have made a mistake, and every time you think about it, right, it can cause you pain and anxiety, right? So it's important to have the self-compassion to say, okay, I made a mistake, right? To take the steps to heal towards that. So whether it's seeking forgiveness, both seeking forgiveness from other people, but also forgiving yourself. Because sometimes we do the best that we can do with the information that we have. And later on, we realize that what we might have done was wrong, but at that time, we did the best that we thought we were doing. So having self-compassion, healthy boundaries, so allow yourself space to heal. Teach your nervous system safety that, okay, I made a mistake. right? How can I move forward from this? So we know that, for example, language has a direct impact on our nervous system. We know that when we say things like, this pain is so bad, it won't stop hurting, everybody has this disease, there's nothing I can do to prevent it, that can actually help your brain in creating the neurotransmitters that you might not want and creating that disbalance. So, and it can actually it can actually increase pain. So what you want to do is change your language and say, it's challenging right now. It's not an easy sensation for me. However, I will do this to help myself. So heal I will take the right medicines. I will stretch. I will find a solution. I will take care of my body. I will eat right, etc. Right? And when you use positive language, through gratitude, through journaling, through therapy, through the way you talk to yourself as well, the way you have self-compassion towards yourself, that can actually help improve your own health, because you are then helping your brain to produce endorphins, which are natural painkillers, as I said, and also gamma globulin, which strengthens your immune system as well, right? So we know that what our brains produce depends in part, not entirely, on our thoughts, feelings, and expectations. So if you're sick, for example, but you have hope and a positive attitude, and you believe that you'll get better, your brain is actually more likely to produce chemicals to improve your immune system, to boost your body's healing power. I mean, a really good friend of mine, she's a personal trainer, and she was just telling me about how there's been research done is that if you're at the gym and you're doing, let's say, bicep curls, and you're really thinking about that muscle, and you're thinking about that muscle flexing and contracting, people who think about the muscle movement when they're doing it actually have better results in the gym. Wow. Right? And this is called, there's a word for it, and I can't, I think it's called muscle memory or something. It's not something like that. But basically, they're actually more effective at the gym. So if you're going through a bad experience, or if you're ill or unwell or unwell in yourself, you can actually promote healing in your body. You can promote endorphins and gamma globulin by having the right language. So and by speaking to yourself in a positive way.
This language, sorry, does it have to be verbal? Do you have to actually say it out loud for yourself to hear? Or could they just be merely thoughts in your head?
There's a lot of, there's a lot of research about affirmations.
Oh yeah.
People put affirmations on their mirrors, etc. And they say, and I know, for example, with things like thyroid problems and everything, doctors often tell patients to just say, look, I'm bigger than this thyroid problem. I can do it. I can manage my stress. I can do this. And I think, when we talk about activating the vagus nerve, and one of the ways to activate it is by singing, because you're activating that thorax. So by singing or by chanting or by prayers or by communal prayers, for example, or by praying together or repetitive prayers, etc., you can then, that really helps to activate your vagus nerve. So I think there's a great power in saying things out loud, verbally, loudly. And you can tell yourself that I'm in pain. However, I am confident in myself that I will heal. My body is not in the best position. However, I will take care of it. Or I made a mistake in the past, and I will forgive myself. And I will, things like that. So you can, and I think it's always better to say things out loud. You don't have to be around, and it can be very difficult at first. It can be very cringy, I suppose. People just say, well, it sounds very weird to be talking, but it can be very helpful.
Thank you so much. And everything that you've mentioned today is a powerful reminder to us as believers that things that have been recommended in our faith to consume are good for not just our gut, but also for our brain. And similarly, things that have been made forbidden, for example, they're not only bad for your body, but also for your thought process and the way you behave. For example, things that makes you intoxicated.
Absolutely. And there's so many prayers, are the prayers that we are taught really teach about gratitude. Like, you wake up in the morning and the first thing you say is, praise be to the God who gave me, life after death, who gave me a new day, who gave me and after eating, you say praise, for this meal and for making me, of the faithful, etc. So we're constantly encouraged to say things out loud, right? And to say positive things. And so there's a lot of the prayers that start with Alhamdulillah, right? And that is really important, that it's really we don't need any proof from science, obviously, but we know it from our faith that, by practicing gratitude, by saying these prayers, by saying these words out loud, we remind ourselves of every moment being a gift. our body being a gift, our children, our nutrition being a gift, our ability to wake up in the morning is a gift. And even with sickness, there's a, we know that we are expiated, for whatever pain we're going through.
Yeah, and there are like so many examples, and I know we have run out of time, but we could have had another 1 hour just discussing this.
Yeah.
Like people who experience memory loss as a result of trauma, or who have been subjected to extreme situations, like people who have been in war and conflict, for example, and how they end up with short-term memory loss, and how relaxation, mindfulness can promote healing, and you can kind of reverse the whole aging process and everything else just by being present in the moment and positive use of positive language. Bushra Anwar, thank you so much, Jazakumullah khairan, for today's episode. I'm sure the viewers must have enjoyed it as much as I did and learned a lot from it. Any final message you would like to give?
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I really hope that everybody goes away with a positive message that and I think the main thing is really taking care of your body and your mind, and being able to recognize when something isn't working, and to work towards that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. To all our viewers who are watching, if you have any questions, comments, feedback to share, or if there's anything you would like to ask Bushra Anwar, you can call in our studio, or you can send a message to us on our Facebook or YouTube channel. We'll see you again next Saturday with another guest, another topic related to your psychological well-being. Till then, look after yourselves. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.